Book 2, Tom Outland Story, Section 7 of The Professor's House by Willa Cather. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. Book 2, Tom Outland Story, Section 7. The next morning, the whinnying of my saddle horse in the shed roused me. I took him down to the foot of the trail where I'd left my trunk and packed my things up to the cabin on his back. I sat up late that night, waiting for Blake, though I knew he wouldn't come. A few days later I rode into Tarpon for news of him. Bill Hook showed me Roddy's horse. He had sold him to the barn for $60. The station master told me Blake had bought a ticket to Winslow, Arizona. I wired the station master and the dispatcher at Winslow, but they could give me no information. Father Duchesne came along on his rounds, and I told him the whole story. He thought Blake would come back sometime, that I'd only miss him if I went out to look for him. He advised me to stay on the mesa that summer and get ahead with my studies, work up my Spanish grammar and my Latin. He had friends all along the Santa Fe, and he was sure we could catch Blake by advertising in the local papers along the road. Albuquerque, Winslow, Flagstaff, Williams, Los Angeles. After a few days with him, I went back to the mesa to wait. I'll never forget the night I got back. I crossed the river an hour before sunset and hobbled my horse in the wide bottom of Cow Canyon. The moon was up, though the sun hadn't set, and it had that glittering silveriness the early stars have in high altitudes. The heavenly bodies look so much more remote from the bottom of a deep canyon than they do from the level. The climb of the walls helps out the eye somehow. I lay down on a solitary rock that was like an island in the bottom of the valley and looked up. The gray sagebrush and the blue-gray rock around me were already in shadow, but high above me the canyon walls were dyed flame color with the sunset, and the cliff city lay in a gold haze against its dark cavern. In a few minutes it, too, was gray, and only the rim rock at the top held the red light. When that was gone, I could still see the copper glow in the pinyons along the edge of the top ledges. The arc of sky over the canyon was silvery blue, with its pale yellow moon, and presently stars shivered into it, like crystals dropped into perfectly clear water. I remember these things because, in a sense, that was the first night I was ever really on the mesa at all, the first night that all of me was there. This was the first time I ever saw it as a whole. It all came together in my understanding as a series of experiments do when you begin to see where they are leading. Something had happened in me that made it possible for me to coordinate and simplify, and that process going on in my mind brought with it great happiness. It was possession. The excitement of my first discovery was a very pale feeling compared to this one. For me, the mesa was no longer an adventure, but a religious emotion. I had read of filial piety in the Latin poets, and I knew that was what I felt for this place. It had formerly been mixed up with other motives, but now that they were gone, I had my happiness unalloyed. What that night began lasted all summer. I stayed on the mesa until November. It was the first time I'd ever studied methodically or intelligently. I got the better of the Spanish grammar and read the 12 books of the Aeneid. I studied in the morning, and in the afternoon I worked at clearing away the mess the German had made in packing, tidying up the ruins to wait another 100 years maybe for the right explorer. I can scarcely hope that life will give me another summer like that one. It was my high tide. Every morning when the sun's rays first hit the mesa top, while the rest of the world was in shadow, I wakened with the feeling that I had found everything instead of having lost everything. Nothing tired me. Up there alone, a close neighbor to the sun, I seemed to get the solar energy in some direct way. And at night, when I watched it drop down behind the edge of the plain below me, I used to feel that I couldn't have borne another hour of that consuming light, that I was full to the brim and needed dark and sleep. All that summer I never went up to the Eagle's Nest to get my diary. Indeed, it's probably there yet. I didn't feel the need of that record. It would have been going backward. I didn't want to go back and unravel things step by step. Perhaps I was afraid that I would lose the whole in the parts. At any rate, I didn't go for my record. During those months I didn't worry much about poor Roddy. I told myself the advertisements would surely get him. I knew his habit of reading newspapers. There are times when one's vitality is too high to be clouded, too elastic to stay down. Hurrying from my cabin in the morning to the spot in the Cliff City where I studied under a cedar, I used to be frightened at my own heartlessness. But the feel of the narrow moccasin-worn trail in the flat rock made my feet glad, like a good taste in the mouth, and I'd forget all about Blake without knowing it. I found I was reading too fast, so I began to commit long passages of Virgil to memory. If it hadn't been for that, I might have forgotten how to use my voice or gone to talking to myself. When I look into the Aeneid now, I can always see two pictures, the one on the page and another behind that, blue and purple rocks and yellow-green pinions with flat tops, little clustered houses clinging together for protection, a rude tower rising in their midst, rising strong with calmness and courage. Behind it a dark grotto, in its depths a crystal spring. Happiness is something one can't explain. You must take my word for it. Troubles enough came afterward, but there was that summer, high and blue, a life in itself. Next winter I went back to Pardee and stayed with the O'Briens again, working on the section and studying with Father Duchesne, and trying to get some word of Blake. Now that I was back on the railroad, I thought I couldn't fail to find him. I went out to Winslow and to Williams, and I questioned the railroad men. We advertised for him in every possible way, had all the Santa Fe operatives and the police and the Catholic missionaries on the watch for him, offered $1,000 reward for whoever found him, but it came to nothing. Father Duchesne and our friends down there are still looking. But the older I grow, the more I understand what it was I did that night on the mesa. Anyone who requites faith and friendship as I did will have to pay for it. I'm not very sanguine about good fortune for myself. I'll be called to account when I least expect it. In the spring, just a year after I quarreled with Roddy, I landed here and walked into your garden, and the rest you know. End of Book 2, Tom Outland Story, Section 7.